Hello there, and thanks for joining us on TVC News at 10. We're reaching you live from our headquarters here in Lagos. On the news at this time, we begin in the nation's capital, where the Trade Union Congress has presented an increase in the national minimum wage as one of its demands to be met before the removal of fuel subsidies can continue. The Trade Union Congress presented the list of demands at a meeting held inside the presidential villa with the delegation of the federal government led by the Secretary to the Government of the Federation, George Akume, as well as others in attendance, who include the Governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria, the Group CEO of the NNPC Limited, former NLC President Adams Oshomole, and other officials mandated by the federal government to join in the negotiations. TVC News State House correspondent Femi Akonde has more.
Nigeria's fiscal authorities at the public presentation of the 2023 budget earlier this year made it known that subsidy payments would stop by June. They added that just 3.36 trillion naira had been earmarked.
Leaders of the Trade Union Congress arrived for a crucial meeting with the federal government over the removal of fuel subsidies. This time, discussions between the federal government and the Trade Union Congress are fruitful, but still inconclusive, as further talks will continue on Tuesday. But the Trade Union Congress succeeded in putting a list of demands on the table for consideration by the federal government. The topmost of these demands is an increase in the national minimum wage.
Yes, the demands are so long, there are so many. There are so many. Part of it was the demand for a minimum wage. And we stated that for us, it is quite apt that the minimum wage today is not a living wage, as we all know. The value of the minimum wage since it was negotiated has plummeted to a very abysmal level as it is today. So we've, and topmost in our demand was clearly stated as well that for utmost good faith and in the interest of social dialogue, that they should revert back the pump price while discussion continues.
The federal government understands the consequence of a failure to meet the demands of the labor unions and has continued to hold talks. The demands of the Trade Union Congress will be presented to President Bola Tinubu as the federal government hopes to ward off a looming workers' strike.
Most important top priority on the list, which the government is also looking at very seriously, and the president has announced before, is the issue of the minimum wage, which the labor movement has demanded as a consequence of this removal of the consequential impact of the removal of subsidy. So government is looking at that, and Mr. President is most likely going to constitute a tripartite committee. That is the committee of federal government and including the states, then the organized labor on the other part, and the private sector. Now, this is a tripartite arrangement. It will be a committee that will study all the dynamics of a wage increase, the percentages, the numbers, and the categories that will be affected. So by Tuesday, when we come back to reconvene and meet with the TUC again, the labor movement, we should have very concrete items to present to the world.
President Tinubu and the Trade Union Congress seem to be on the same page regarding the increase in the national minimum wage. Still, the other demands presented for approval will determine how organized labor and the federal government will walk the tightrope of the removal of fuel subsidy. Femi Akonde, TVC News, Abuja.
Let's bring in Femi Akonde, TVC News State House correspondent, live on the news now to tell us more about the meeting between the Trade Union Congress and the federal government, which ended little while ago. Hello, Femi. So having listened to your report, first help us to narrow down the issues that will be finalized, the core issues that will be finalized when both sides meet again on Tuesday this week.
Yes, Kemi, well, the issue that will be finalized would have to be the national minimum wage issue, which the Trade Union Congress of Nigeria put on the table as part of the demands to be met before they can sheath their sword. Thankfully, President Bola Ahmed Tinubu was already speaking in that line. He openly declared when he met governors of the Progressives Forum that indeed the national minimum wage will have to be worked on, will have to be upwardly reviewed, because this increase in prices, pump price of petrol would affect every sector of the economy, would affect the price of consumer goods, would affect the price of commodities. And it says, indeed, it has become a matter of necessity for government to consider an increase in the minimum wage. But TUC again is insisting that the federal government must revert to the old pump price while negotiation continues. But the federal government again, before the Tuesday meeting, would look for other ways to how they can raise money, come up with this minimum wage, what they can pay, what the government can afford, and also how the government will make available palliatives or other provisions that would ensure that the impact of these subsidy removal is not harshly felt by Nigerians, most of whom are vulnerable and live below the poverty line. Kemi.
Understand what Mr. Alake was referring to when he mentioned the tripartite committee between organized labor, the federal government and the private sector. When is work to begin from this committee, and who will represent all these three sides?
Well, he said that work will begin as soon as possible. The tripartite committee, like he said, would comprise of state governments as the subnational, the organized labor, the TUC, the NLC. The private sector also will be part of that committee, so that they can harmonize and all be on the same page in terms of a minimum wage, that the NLC would and the TUC would like to call now a living wage, because they say what we have today is no longer a living wage because of the economic realities in the country. So all of these indices will be brought to bear. The presentations will be made by the subnational to know what they can afford, and also the organized private sector to also see what they can afford, and they would harmonize it with that of the federal government to then come up with a uniform national minimum wage that will be in the interest of all workers in the country. Kemi.
Femi, the Joe Ajero-led Nigeria Labour Congress was absent at this leg of discussions between the federal government and the organized labor. What's the impact of that?
Well, the Joe Ajero-led NLC has already taken a stand on the matter. They insist that they would down tools on Wednesday in protest against the removal of a petrol subsidy. But, the TUC said they are still open to negotiation. They would still like to continue talks with the federal government. They are looking for how all of this can be amicably resolved, and they understand that the country is at a very critical moment, just fresh out of a transition, a successful transition. The administration of Bola Ahmed Tinubu is less than 1 week old, and they also want the start of this new administration. They are also trying to be considerate to ensure that the start of the new administration is smooth, because they know that the impact of a strike by the workers in the country would also have a ripple effect across the country, not just on the government. The government alone will not be the one to bear the brunt. Most of the brunt will be borne by Nigerians who may not be able to go about their daily duty, who may not be able to go to the market to buy goods, who may not be able to open shops to sell. A lot of people may not be able to come out to make a living, their daily living. So they are putting all of this into consideration and to ensure that indeed the organized labor also has a human face while they engage with government to see how all of this can be resolved amicably.